Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Wherever you are in the world, welcome. This is a class called My Ancestor in South Africa. And we're going to spend the next 20 minutes talking about two groups of people who settled in the Cape and Natal colonies, some voluntarily and many who were brought there without their consent. So we only have about 20 minutes in this class, so it's fairly brief. Please take a look at the class handouts, because I've included a lot of information and links in there, and it'll be very valuable to you. So who came to South Africa and settled there? The Dutch arrived in 1652 and established a halfway station as a supply stop for their ships. These are the ships of the VOC, or the Dutch East India Company, who were traveling to Indonesia and needed that halfway point just to resupply all their ships. During this period, the Dutch also began to bring many enslaved persons from other parts of Africa, like Angola and Senegal and Indochina, to the Cape Colony. And many South Africans today are very proud descendants of the enslaved persons that were brought to the Cape between 1653 and 1822. By about 1658, the Dutch farmers began to cultivate the land and plant crops, and they needed some additional labor. The local indigenous population, these were the Khoi, they were nomads, and they resisted the pressure from the Dutch to work the land. So the Dutch began to look elsewhere, and this is when they looked at bringing enslaved persons to the Cape, specifically to work the land. Now, the Cape and Natal colonies attracted settlers from places like the British Isles, as well as Germany and Norway and lots of other places. Assisted immigration schemes meant that oftentimes these immigrants who were fairly poor, this was their way of getting free passage and land. Land was the big pull for these immigrants, and they were willing to make this journey to a foreign place like the Cape Colony or the Natal colonies. So how have the enslaved persons in South Africa been documented? Well, one of the projects, which is really incredible, is called the First 50 Years Project. This is the work of Delia Robertson, and it's just exceptional if you're looking for information on the first decades of settlement in the Cape Colony after 1652. This site includes records on the first people, that is the indigenous tribes that were found in the Cape before the arrival of the Dutch, as well as the enslaved, the European settlers who made the Cape their home, and as is the case with most of the records of the enslaved, you will find them mentioned in the records of other people, usually Europeans. So the work of this First 50 Years project included looking for those names of the enslaved within these documents, trying to identify them, to bring these names into the light, and to acknowledge the contribution made by those enslaved persons to the history, the culture, and the ethnicity of South Africa. Now, there is so much to study on this site. You could easily spend a couple of hours, if not more, there. They also contain baptisms and marriage registers of the Dutch Reformed Church, journals and letters, transcriptions of the birth and sale of enslaved persons. There is also an excellent timeline of the Cape, of the settlement at the Cape. So please go and spend some time looking at that site. One of the other ways that we can look at documents on the enslaved persons in the Cape Colony is to look at FamilySearch. They hold a collection titled A South Africa Register of Slaves from 1762 until about 1838, and it has some really interesting records on it. So let's take a look at those. So on your screen is a register with the names of the enslaved on it. At the top in the red box is the name of this particular slave owner, Jan Andries Horek. The information that is given, let me grab my pointer so that I can show you this. We get the date of registration, the name of the enslaved person, their sex, the age or date of birth, the name of the mother, and the country that they were born in. The last two columns were for occupation and remarks. Do you notice anything about the dates in that first column and the dates of birth for the top three entries? These are the dates of birth over here. This is the date of registration. So date of birth here was November 29th, registration 25th of December of the same year, 1820. So these are babies being born into slavery. So let's take a look at the first entry for the enslaved person by the name of Felida. So I've enlarged that so that we can see. Felida's name is in the red circle there. And what we can see is that she was born on the 29th of November, 1820, and she was registered on the 28th of December, 1820. As we move through this, we can see her mother's name was Jasmina, and she was born in this colony, meaning the Cape Colony. What is interesting to note is in this remarks column, it says that she was sold and transferred on the 20th of April 1833. So we can work out there she was about 13 years old, and she was sold to the widow A.G. de Wet of Cape Town. Other information in that remarks column will sometimes state when the enslaved person died, as you can see in line number 5 there, the entry for Charles, who was born on the 7th of December 1823, also to a Jasmina. So it could very likely be the same person as that first entry we looked at, just a slightly different spelling. The remarks tell us that it was reported on the 31st of May that the child had died on the 25th of April 1824, so was only a very few months old. This is the entry here that we're looking at. Now, another set of records which can help trace enslaved persons is FamilySearch's collection of slave birth certificates and slave death registers. Let's take a look at an example here of a slave birth certificate. Written in Dutch, the birth of the slave girl named Lena is noted as occurring on the 23rd of April 1820, and her mother is named as Anneke van de Kaap. The register notes that they were both the property of a Mr. Leibbrandt. Now, often the enslaved person would be given a last name based on where they were born or the month that they were born, but in this case, Anneke is known as Anneke van de Kaap, which literally means Anneke of the Cape. Now, these birth certificates were created at the time of birth, but a birth register was also kept, and FamilySearch has these collections too. So here we can see an example of a page from the birth registers for 1825 in the Cape Colony. The birth of an enslaved person meant that the slave owner had to not only register the birth, but pay a fee. Now, registers were kept of the birth and of the monies paid. In this example, the slave owner certifies that his female slave named Sarah was on the 28th of April 1825 delivered of a female infant, hence named Jamila, and another female slave, Louisa, was also likewise delivered of a female infant, hence named Sarah. And in pencil is written the monies paid. Let me grab my pointer so I can show you right here. Right here is the monies that are paid. The date and the place of registration also occurs, Cape Town, 18th of October 1825, and then the name of the slave owner at the bottom. Now, death registers for enslaved persons were also kept. Those are available on FamilySearch. So between the certificate of birth, the birth register, the registration of the enslaved by the slave owner, and the death registers, it is possible to locate an enslaved ancestor in this very early period of Dutch rule in the Cape Colony. As the British become more involved with the Cape, in the late 1790s and early 1800s, we see the arrival of a lot of British military. But when the British formally gained possession of the Cape, we begin to see this large-scale immigration from Britain begin. Remember, at the time, England was in the midst of a severe unemployment problem. This was after the Napoleonic Wars, and the parishes just simply could not support their poor. So the immigrants were encouraged by the British government to immigrate. They would be given free passage and some land, But there were some other reasons too that the settlers themselves didn't know about. The British government was eager to move these immigrants to the Cape Colony to form a barrier between the eastern frontier that was ruled by the British and the land that was lived on at the time by the Xhosa people. There were ongoing battles and skirmishes in this area, and the British government wanted to try to stabilize it by bringing in some more immigrants. So the land promised to those settlers would form that barrier. And as I mentioned, this is something that they didn't know about at the time. The government also wanted to boost the amount of English-speaking persons in the Cape at the time. Now, the 1820 British settlers are probably one of the most well-known groups of settlers to immigrate to the Cape. There were about 60 different parties on 17 different ships who left England in 1819 and early 1820. The British government received about 90,000 applications, and only about 4,000 were chosen. The settlers were promised two things: free passage and about 100 acres of land per man in the Eastern Cape. And you can see those green shapes on the map. That shows the land that was allocated to the settlers. So what records exist to document these 1820 settlers? There are hundreds of letters and journals and other original documents at the National Archives at Kew in London. There are books with passenger lists, information on the ships and the different parties. There are numerous websites devoted to the 1820 settlers, and I've noted all of those in your handout. If you have ancestors who traveled as part of the 1820 settlers, you are very fortunate because there is so much information that does exist. So here's a quick look at a little information about one of those settlers. His name was John Mandy. He was a passenger on the ship Nautilus. Some of his letters were written to his mother back in England, and they've been preserved, and they give just a wonderful look at the journey and what it was like. Mandy's wife Mary was about 6 months pregnant when they set off on their journey, and their two boys, John and Stephen, were 5 and 4 years old when they left Gravesend, London on the 3rd of December 1819. Now, the beginning of their journey was not a very good one. John wrote this: "We left Gravesend on Thursday morning, had a fine wind to the Queen's Channel, where we arrived on the following day in the morning and dropped anchor. It came on to blow tremendously hard, the sea running mountains high. Our troubles began, the sea breaking over us in all directions, tables, chairs, boxes, plates, and dishes, men, women, and children, all mixed together, tumbling over one another, and all dreadfully seasick, except myself and Smith, who was on deck working the ship, I below, the basin holder. In the midst of this, the sea broke into our cabin windows, dashed glass and frame in. The things that were below, rolling and sliding, took to swimming. About 3 o'clock we had an alarm of fire. When the ship struck on the sands, all was confusion and dismay. Even the sailors seemed panic-struck." So not a very fortuitous beginning to their journey. A little later in the journey, on the 1st of March 1820, his son was born on the ship, and they named him William Nautilus Mandy. I love this little excerpt. I particularly love the fact that he calls himself the basin holder. Now, another type of assisted immigration was that of immigration under guarantee. So many times an immigrant that was already settled in the Cape or Natal colonies would sponsor the journey of other family or friends, and registers were also kept of those sponsors and the individuals that they had assisted. So let's take a look at an example. So I've enlarged a portion of the register on the right of your screen. Number 9 on the register there is Richard Gelda. He is a Berea and Durban merchant, and he is sponsoring the Underwood family. Mary Underwood is 27 and is the wife of Thomas Underwood, a mechanic. Little Fanny, aged 4, and George, aged 7, have no employment. Let me grab my pointer. Do you see that here? It says no employment, which I love. George and little Fanny were not holding up their part of the bargain here. But Robert, age 14, is a mechanic's boy. What is really interesting when you're looking at these records is that the place of origin of an immigrant is given. Under each individual family, it's written where they're coming from. And in this case, you can see it right here, the Underwood family was from Eccles, near Manchester. FamilySearch also has passenger arrival records for Natal. These are registers in chronological order by date of arrival in Port Natal. So the earliest registers date from about 1845, and they were kept by the Natal Land and Immigration Board. Applicants who had applied for immigration on behalf of family or skilled workers were noted next to their names, the immigrants themselves, the ship that they arrived on. You can see that in the purple circle there. And this one is the Dun Robin. The class of passage, their ages and occupations were given to you. So let's take a look at this example. If you look in the red box, J.B. Starton from Point, which is a place in Natal, was the applicant for his mother and 2 sisters. And you can see that here. It says mother, sister, and sister. His mother, A. Warwick, was 50 years old, and she was a widow. She was traveling together with 2 single daughters, 20-year-old E. Starton and 18-year-old E. Starton. And they traveled, as I said, on the SS Dun Robin from London to Natal. Now, those FamilySearch records are really helpful because it gives us enough information to search for the actual passenger list. And we can use Find My Past's collection of passenger lists leaving the UK. And here is the passenger list for the SS Dun Robin Castle with Anne Warwick, aged 50, no occupation. And then we get the names of the girls, Evelyn, aged 20, and Elizabeth, aged 18. FamilySearch's collection of Natal immigration and passenger records is really quite large, although most of it is unindexed. Their immigrant records from 1845 to about 1911 are described as holding passenger lists, applications for immigration assistance, title grants, and ship arrivals and departures for Natal, South Africa. On the screen are the film notes from FamilySearch for this collection, which just shows you how many records are available. Thank you so much, everyone, for spending these 20 minutes with me. I hope it's been useful to you. Don't forget to go and have a look at the class handout where you will find a lot more information on your ancestor in South Africa. And if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them. On the screen are my contact details, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of RootsTech Connect 2021.